Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Modern Business Operations. My name is Sagi. I'm the CEO and founder of Tonkin. And today I have the very pleasure to host Kevin Floyd. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us. Well, Kevin, you're the Deputy CPO, Chief Procurement Officer of the City of Atlanta.
Yes, sir.
Very, very happy to get into the conversation here. As we kind of briefly talked in the pre-show, I was fortunate to talk to a lot of leaders in procurement as well in the private sector, but I think you're the first one we're hosting in the public sector. So very interested to learn more about that. But maybe before we go too deep into any one topic, I would love to just start with, if you don't mind, tell us a bit about kind of how you got to this role, a little bit about your background and your story.
Sure, absolutely. And a privilege to be here and excited to share the sort of flavor of the public sector that a lot of folks don't necessarily get to see too much of. Kevin Floyd, I currently am the Deputy Chief Procurement Officer here in Atlanta. I've been here just over 10 years. So I spent the better part of my career, started right out of college at 23 with the city, sort of an entry-level role working in the technology space for procurement. So building workflows, systems, processes for the procurement process. And then I've been very fortunate to have moved up the ranks up to the deputy commissioner level. So I spend a lot of my time these days focused on setting strategy, sort of casting vision, coming up with policy procedure. And it's all about how do we innovate the public sector. So when you talk about what's the fundamental divide between public sector and private sector operations is, there's a large belief that the government is always just going to be light years behind the private sector, right? There's all these rules, there's all this red tape. And so I view one of the things that I champion the most is, no, it doesn't have to be that way. Yes, there are laws. Yes, there are things, but corporates have laws they have to follow. They have policies and procedures, right? That's nothing new. So there's a lot of area where we're able to trim the fat and streamline and standardize things a lot closer to how it's done in the private sector. So that's one of the things that I really champion is how can we leverage these technologies that the private sector have had for 5-10 years, right? And become not just behind the curve, but cutting edge and then eventually to bleeding edge. So that's what we're about here in Atlanta is really just kind of reimagining what does public sector procurement look like? What is a procurement organization in the public sector? How does it run? How does it operate? So that's my passion. That's what I spend my days here doing.
Well, first of all, it's honestly, it's exciting to hear. I think you're right. I think the first reaction that listeners probably have when they think about public sector and innovation are like water and oil, you know what I mean?
Right.
They don't mix. So you probably might have the most challenging, worst kind of like hill to trying to cross. How do you go about that? So where do you even start? Is that is the planning years ahead, or you are in a shorter cycle? Like, how can we improve next year and the year after that? Can you share a little bit just the dynamics of it compared to to probably the private sector, but just in generally, honestly?
Sure. I think it's because it's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of doing business. It's really a mindset shift, right? So step one is getting the employees here on board, sort of building that culture of what is this going to look like? And you kind of have to throw the playbook out the window of the old guard, the old school way of thinking. So you really got to invest in the employees, having the right people aligned in the right subject areas, and have them bought in, because we're nothing without our employees, right? So that's step one. And then I find that it is sort of kind of year by year planning, just because of how transformative it has been the last 2 years specifically. But I think we're getting to a place where we can start that 5-year master plan, 10-year plan sort of strategy. So what is the future and how do we build it so that when I'm not here anymore, right? When the CPO is not here, our visions, our strategies outlive us, right? That building that legacy. So, but it really is because there's so much involved in a year by year. I think we're kind of focused on tackling it in those lanes currently. But I definitely do see it getting to where it's more that longer term, multi-year vision for sure.
So there's a lot of tackle here. A lot of things I personally also find intriguing. trying to not go into the maybe some landmines that exist all over, and and stay as like non-political as possible when it comes to the public sector. I am curious though, and when you think about the incentives for the public sector, I think that's a lot of times, I'm sure you're the first interviewing in the podcast from the public sector, but I've obviously met a lot of folks, maybe not a lot, but several folks that are leading, groups within the public sectors, whether it's in, as in your case, government over a city or a state and so on, or, in a more, or a county, or in a more sort of like, even like education or other things that are sort of like heavily relying on government funding. How is the efficiency and incentive structure, actually at the end of the day work? When you think about public companies, especially the big ones, you're right. They are not that far from the government at the end of the day, or the public sector, because there is to move anything, takes a long time and a lot of internal politics. But there's at least the assumption that there's incentive structures within the public sector of being, as profitable as possible and so on, in where I think the public sector is incentives, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but this is my read of it, are not always as black and white of what is the incentive. So, how do you kind of go about that? Because definitely feels like you're trying to drive innovation. You're thinking the way that, just like any other, innovative CPO office I've ever interviewed. But how do you go about that in an environment like that?
Sure. Well, I'll start and say, I always tell people that procurement, even public procurement, is apolitical, right? We're not, obviously, things change with what's going on in Washington. Every 4 to 8 years, we get a new mayor. In Atlanta, that's certainly going to bring some level of change, right? But our processes aren't dependent on who's holding the position. So that's one of the beauties of it to me that I like, is you can build a process that is very black and white. Some things are politically gray. Procurement's not one of those things, right? So it's very black and white. But when you talk about incentives, it's interesting because it's a space that doesn't get utilized a lot, and it's really sort of forming itself, at least here in Atlanta. So we are building, as I sit here talking to you, building a structure for contracts that would look at incentive-based initiatives, volume discounts, tiered pricing, all of the things that are very, very common and have been for many years in the private world. We're working on that. And a great instance is here in Atlanta, a couple of years ago, there was a massive fire that burned down a section of a major roadway, and we were able to employ an incentive to the contractor to finish way ahead of schedule, which is something that's typically not been done. And so, of course, it made companies eager to jump on the opportunity, and of course, it got a throughway back up and running way faster than it would have. So it's definitely something that's top of mind for us. I can't say there's a complete structure built out, but I think it's something over the rest of this year and next year, you're really going to see the city spending time and communicating that to folks. So this is something that we want to put on the table.
Yeah, because I think at the end of the day, like you said, there's those best practices that have been successful, especially in supply chain, and, I think in procurement in general, it's such a, obviously more than just the ability of it to control spend or sort of like make sure that you are spending the right way. It has a lot of potential of really impacting strategy too.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's an intriguing promise in where what you're saying is where that the procurement organization within public sector is not political, is not in the area. It can drive for efficiency and for innovation, regardless of the political focus of the moment, if you will.
Sure. Yeah, I think the politicians would probably disagree with me because procurement's where the money is, and so but I truly believe for us to be effective, for us to be innovators, we have to say yes. Obviously, we're going to prioritize the mayoral initiatives and do the things that whoever holds the office wants to move forward. But the standard process works regardless of who that office holder is. And that's what I think makes us able to start casting years long visions, right? Because we're not depending on, oh, well, we can do this for 4 years and then maybe somebody else comes in and we have to completely change course. No, that's not going to be the case.
Maybe if we double click for a second on, I think on the areas where, because I think you're right. I think that's where the money is, but I think there's a lot, and I think people maybe miss or underestimate. By the way, that's happening in the private sector too. Underestimate the impact of procurement on every part of the business or in a public sector of our life, right? And so we kind of like before the show we talked a little bit about some of the unfortunate events recently with weather related events, the hurricane and some fires, and I know recently there was also like a water main that breaks, in the city. Maybe share a little bit how does that come to then your desk? How you guys are impacting or are part of that type of situation? Give more color, for the audience, the importance of that.
Sure.
Of that process to be more efficient and more innovative as well.
In the unfortunate times where a crisis happens and we find ourselves in an emergency posture, I think a lot of folks kind of put procurement at the back of their mind, right? That's not their first call. Isn't going to be, let me call procurement and get them mobilized on that. But we're really trying to change that narrative of, no, we are that strategic partner for you in the times of crisis, and we actually have a emergency operations plan, just like the rest of the city that gets engaged. And so in the instance like the water main break, I'm getting a call at 9 o'clock in the morning saying, hey, here's the things that we need. Can you get us some suppliers? Can we start mobilizing? Here's the logistics that's going on. And so it really is an all hands on deck effort. But our role is, because we're the supply chain experts here, right, of knowing who to contact, having that continuity of supply, especially you're talking about a water main break. There's going to be a shortage of bottled water because everybody's going to run out to the store, right? Where can I go get it? Same thing with a hurricane. People are going to buy water. They're going to buy dry goods. They're going to buy paper products. So, we need to be on top of all that. Just like with the pandemic, where do we buy our PPE from? And so our role is really just to jump in there, understand what's going on, hearing the updates. And it's always fascinating to me in a situation like this where things that normally you wouldn't even think about procurement in the realm of what's going on, but some update that I'm hearing goes, oh, you know what? We can respond to that. Oh, this hospital is having low pressure. Let's deploy some portable water stations out there to make sure that they're okay. All these things that really procurement isn't even on the table of what's being discussed. I think we have the ability, just by being at the table, to go, you know what? We actually can help you guys strategize on this. And so it's always, every one of these is a learning experience for me, I think, for the team here. And we just get better in how we respond. And hopefully we don't want lots of crisis that we're responding to, but we get more agile, we get more efficient, we build the supply base up, and then we have a repeatable plan so that when something happens, I don't go, oh my goodness, there's a hurricane coming. What do we do? It's like deploy the emergency operations plan. Everybody's got their part to play and we're ready to go. So, we really have become a valued part of the emergency operations response for the city in these areas because of what we're able to do and what we bring to the table.
That's fascinating. I think you actually brought an interesting point. And I think a lot of times, when people talk about, in operations in general, procurement specifically, but also in operations in general, of being more strategic and being more, less tactical, more strategic. there's a funny sort of dependent chicken and egg type of cycle here, because really like the best, run situation is where there was a crisis that you didn't even feel like it did. Like
Right.
the structure around it was already kind of pre-built for it to sustain the structure, the crisis, and then no one felt it. And so sometimes it's like no news is the best news type of thing, and where
Right.
and then folks might, because of that, not appreciate as much the value, because it was averted. It is much easier to understand the pain when you felt the pain, but of course, to do a better job strategically from an operation perspective is to create a situation where, I don't care that happened. I already have I don't care, in parentheses, I've got I already have the system can absorb the crisis, and it's not even a crisis anymore because we kind of plan for it. I think it's just much more visceral, in your ecosystem and role, because it is a lot of times, people understand that if there's a crisis, people immediately are going to go to there's going to be lines in the gas station, and there's going to be people hoarding things in the store. How much of your guys' planning strategically is around, disaster recovery or prevention?
It's definitely something we've started spending a lot more time in the last couple of years, both just from having things that we've gone through, and then also planning for the future, because, Atlanta's got the World Cup coming in 2026. We hosted the Super Bowl several years back, and then obviously hoping to do so again. And so those major events, while not a crisis, need a very similar strategy for them. And so, I find that at least once a month, I'm in a meeting talking about like response and strategy to these things. And there's a bit of a team that's kind of been formed at the city to start putting this together. And one of the things that I personally like to employ, that I find that we do, is after action recaps when we go through something like this. Okay, and like you're saying, like, yes, we want it to be where it is seamless and you don't feel it, but I also like to be very, upfront with folks, like in the water crisis, like what did that actually look like? That looked like me personally making and receiving 200 phone calls, right? And so it's not about, oh, look what I did. I made a bunch of phone calls, but it's like, when you go through something like this, understand it's a lot of, your phone's going to be ringing off the hook. You're going to be on two phones, managing stuff. So when you manage the expectation and really share, and the public too, I think respect that a lot. When you just communicate, here's what's going on, guys. Here is our actual response. We've got guys making phone calls 11:30, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, responding to this. Then they feel like, okay, something's being done. I may not see it, that my water still may be shut off, but there's something going on behind the scenes that's working to alleviate that crisis. And I think that transparency is our first and foremost commitment to the citizens and the residents that we serve.
Oh, absolutely. Well, this is a good maybe segue to something you mentioned earlier as well, as an example for innovation, where you guys are looking at those different contractual options of how you work with suppliers, and and some of this last point about doing that retrospect of what the action that has been taken, creating that transparency. What other things you guys already deployed, or you kind of like top of mind for you, things you're working on, whether it's from a methodology perspective, or technology perspective, or just management practices that you're thinking of are gonna move the needle for you guys in the next for 24 months?
Technology is always top of mind. I started working in technology with the city, so it's near and dear to my heart. And so I think the technology drives it's the backbone of innovation, right? You can have the greatest policies and processes, but if you don't have the workflows and the technology to drive it, you're nowhere. So technology, I say all the time, AI is the flavor of the month. It's not going anywhere. So how do we start leveraging AI and utilizing it to do our jobs more efficiently and effectively? So I think that's probably the biggest game changer in the space that we work on. So a lot of times being spent on, what's the security for that? What's the parameters on how it's going to be used and deployed and all of that? We're super, super excited about that. Also working on some overalls. We have an Oracle ERP system here. So always looking at enhancements that we can make to that. But then it's also all the great technology is great, but if you don't have a process to use them, you're also nowhere. So we implemented a DOP Academy to focus on training our employees, training the city, training our suppliers, how to engage with us. And so really continuing to build that out and just make sure that we're communicative. We have an open platform and space for people to come and learn from us. And then really, for me, it's about empowering the individual contributors of the department. How can I let you set strategy? I say it all the time to the team. Yes, the leadership of the department can set overall strategy, but if we're the only strategic thinkers, the organization is not going to move forward as effectively at all. And so it's really, trying to teach them, you do have the freedom to come up with a strategy and present it. And yes, we may tweak it and hey, you're not on the right track. We want to do it this way, but at least that strategic thought, that critical thinking is there. And so that's something that I really want to spend the next 6 months investing in. The team here is, how do we build this team of very strategic thinkers that when something happens, crisis or otherwise, their first thought is, let me put a strategy in for this. Let me get a risk mitigation plan. Let me put all this in place. And so that they're executing on that. Then I think it's a well-oiled machine at that point when everybody's just working in lockstep, working in tandem, and there's that collaboration there.
Yeah, that sounds very like cutting edge, at top of the line. So congrats on that. Makes me as a citizen very hopeful and excited, to be honest. I think, you mentioned another point, maybe that's can be the last point of this part is you mentioned around working with the rest of the parties outside of procurement and how to align that. How do you feel about that? Is that something that are there areas, that are easier to pull in? Are there areas where there's a lot of education that needs to be done? How does procurement being viewed within sort of like the public sector by the rest of the departments?
Sure. We refer to them as our partners all the time, with intentionality, right? Like we only go procure it. You all have to establish the need in the user agencies. And so, I think we've made some significant efforts of becoming that value add, that strategic advisor on the front end of the process. Now some folks are very much on board and like, yes, that's great. We love procurement. Others need a little bit of convincing because they've got some heartburn from past experiences of what we're talking about, what public procurement looks like. And so there are times where we have to prove ourselves. And I think we've done a really good job of saying, like, if you come to us, if you give us the opportunity to show you what our procurement process actually is, you will be happy with the result that we deliver. But it's also about continuous improvement. So just because I go through one successful process and I've got you trust me now, I'm not going to take my foot off the gas and go, all right, well, you're bought in. So we're not going to try to do it better next time. Like, no, the next time we want it to be even more efficient, more effective. We want to be engaged proactively without you even having to come to us. Like we're seeking out you for your needs. And so it is a bit of a challenge because a lot of, we call it throwing it over the fence. A lot of times stuff gets thrown over the fence and it's just sort of in that umbrella of, oh, it's stuck in procurement. I think if you talk to a lot of public sector folks, that's sort of the pain point across the industry of if anything is always stuck in procurement, right? And it's going, no, but where is it actually? Is it something that's in the procurement hands that we can tackle? Or is it something that happens to fall within the procurement process, but has a stakeholder outside of procurement. I can't control what they do. And it goes back to that sort of transparent, that open, honest communication of, no, we're going to tell you where it is, and we're going to tell you who the accountable owner for the next step is, and we're going to hold that person accountable, whether they sit in procurement or outside. We have to collectively work together. So, that obviously that's change management, that's project management, all of the things. I think we're not immune by any means to the struggles that any company across the world, public or private, is going to wrestle with those things. But I think we have done a really good job of saying, no, we don't just say procurement here is different. We're actually putting in the action. We're showing the results that actually has driven that change.
Yeah, I agree that the transparency piece, it's sort of like you work on the process, you work on, you work on the operation of how things should operate, and then people find it confusing, or honestly, they just don't look. It's like, to no one, not from a malicious point, it's just people always have other things and they just don't look, and then it's very easy to then things just get stuck, and that's why I find always fascinating in how when you have a crisis or when you have like an overload on the system, like a good thing like a Super Bowl, but it is push forward everything to be a lot more aware, people to be more aware, the system is more aware of itself. And then on peacetime, if you will, people are just kind of like get into the, the rot of it, really, for lack of a better word. Sure. And that continuous innovation, continuous efficiency, continuous progress, it is hard to do regardless of what, of what you are, in that state of continuously pushing, so yeah, I think it's a good reminder too for everyone within a company, but also as a client of a company or a client of an organization or a government, to remember that, it's all actually very similar, Yeah. Very, very similar. No, that's super. Look, this was super insightful. I would love to go back and kind of finish up with a personal note too. You went through the ranks, in the public sector. Any advice or something you took with you through the years and you feel like it's worth paying forward?
Sure. There's two things that I've sort of carried with me through the journey that I've learned over time. One is you learn as much from the negative as you do from the positive, the good managers and the bad, the good outcomes and the bad, right? So always looking for the silver lining, even when something doesn't work out right. You take just as much, if not more, from those situations as you do any other. And the other one is, early on, it was I was given the opportunity to be a fly on the wall in so many rooms where I was hearing leaders talk, and I would, I would just kind of sit there quietly and take notes in the early days, especially of, okay, this is happening and this is how they responded to it, and this is how their mind works, and they're able to quickly kind of strategize and throw out a solution. And so I really made it a point to, any door that would be open to me, I tried to go in, whether it was related to my job or not, just to get the exposure, get the experience. And I try to foster that with my team now of, if I'm going somewhere and I think you can learn even just by sitting in the room, not necessarily adding anything to the meeting by talking, but you can take something away. I want to make that space available for anybody, because I have learned so much by watching people, hearing things. And I love to say that things are cyclical, right? So I hear things in these meetings, and then down the line, something that I'm working on ties back to that. And had I not been in the room, I would have had no idea. And it's like, oh, just made my life a whole lot easier just because I took that opportunity to go sit and listen. And so just being an intent listener and taking every opportunity afforded, I think, is one of the best things, regardless where you're at in your career, that you can do.
I love it. No, by the way, it ties all of it perfectly, because if you think about, you're mentioning everyone needs to be a strategic thinker. I want the team to be all kind of driving strategies in my experience, you just can't teach it. You can be like, oh, do this 1, 2, 3, 4 things, and then you're
right. Yeah. Now you're a strategic thinker for life. You got it down. Yeah. No.
It's not. It's almost like the definition difference between a strategic and tactical. Like tactical, like, do this, and this. The strategic one is like, and so really the best way to learn about it is sort of through experiencing and being in the room. So I agree wholeheartedly in that. And then it's also come back to the visibility you mentioned. At the end of the day, the visibility and transparency is part of it. And so, being in the room sometimes is just creating that visibility as well and awareness. So I love it. And thank you so much. Very actionable, I think, for everyone listening. It's, this is very practical. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. If anyone, want to reach out, I don't know, your LinkedIn or otherwise, if people want to professionally talk to you about your guys' things or thoughts, anywhere they can reach out.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, just Kevin Floyd, really easy to find. And then our website is atlsuppliers.com. So there's a way that you can request a meeting with us through there, find out all the information about what we're doing here, all of our training opportunities, all of our solicitation opportunities are all going to be there. So we like to say, as the mayor recently coined, wake up, brush your teeth, visit atlsuppliers.com, and you got a good start to your day.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much for the time and the great conversation.
Thank you. Truly a privilege.